folks what you're studying right now, because this is going to be a
So,
really important topic. Sorry to interrupt right off the bat, but today we are talking about Jesus movies, because we talk about movies every day, 5 days a week, at noon on Aristotle Full Throttle. And Jake is a very special guest with expertise in this field, because why is that, Jake?
because so right now I'm doing a part-time program to it's going towards a seminary degree because I'm aiming towards becoming a chaplain in the military.
So we've got expertise on biblical studies and the like. Am I right?
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily. Yeah, there is an element of intentional investigation that has happened on this subject. So we'll go with that.
That's awesome. Well, I'm very excited to have you here. Thank you for doing this with us, because we do like to talk about all the topics concerning movies, even movies that surround religion, because there have been many throughout history. I just want to give a shout out to Jimmy James and wish his grandparents well. They just actually just notified him and told him that they have COVID, and I just learned that in the Discord chat. So welcome, Jimmy James. I hope you are well. I hope your grandparents get well soon. Today we're talking about Jesus movies, Bible movies, movies, I guess, that particularly feature the character, the messianic figure, Jesus. And there have been many.
There have been a lot, and there's been some people that have played Jesus that I think would surprise you.
Name one.
Ewan McGregor.
Now, Ewan McGregor, I know, and everybody knows, as Obi-Wan Kenobi, and probably the savior of the prequel trilogy, if you ask me. The Lord and Savior of the prequel trilogy. I find this funny. As much as reviled as the prequel trilogy is, what's up, Ron per TV? Thank you for joining us on Twitch. Anybody who is joining us now can also go over to the Twitch and hang out. I find those the prequels particularly funny because Ewan McGregor is universally loved, no matter, even though the prequels themselves are very much reviled, not by Jimmy James. Jimmy James loves Star Wars, period. We know that. But it's interesting how he's transcended the hatred for the prequels. And I didn't know he played Jesus until you told me that earlier today. What movie does Ewan McGregor play Jesus?
So I think it's something like Last Days in the Desert. I'm going to look it up real quick right now, but I think it was made in 2016.
2016, Last Days in the Desert. So he plays Obi-Wan Kenobi in that.
2015. I mean, I would say, yeah. Like the way it opens, it's just basically him just wandering around in the desert. And I was like, someone can totally take all of this footage and just kind of like recut it and then make, a Star Wars movie out of it with Obi-Wan on Tatooine.
I was thinking, because the internet is funny like this, because as soon as you think of an idea and then you Google it, someone thought of it and did it already. So I feel like we're reaching a singularity with the internet in that it will just achieve thoughts before you've had them. It'll have like precognitive actual products. You're like, I would like this combination of things to happen. And then there you go. On Netflix, they'll have Bird Box. They'll have, which is like a combination of movies. I'm kind of digressing, but I feel like that Netflix uses just an algorithm to create their new movies. Like Bird Box was like, what if you can't see anything? And then I saw a preview for another movie on Netflix which was like, what if you couldn't smell anything? And then on Apple TV, they're like, they have that whole other thing with the Sight or See, that TV show, with Jason Momoa being, I think Jason Momoa could play a cool Jesus.
I mean, yeah, isn't that he was Jesus, the son of a king of the ocean.
He is the Lord and Savior of jellyfish.
Yeah.
What? So Ewan McGregor played. I watched the trailer for that. What was it? What was it called? 40 Days in the Desert.
Last Days in the Desert. There is also 40 Days in the Desert, which I think is either, I don't know if it's out already or it's coming out this year. But yeah, Last Days of the Desert, and I guess 2015. So I was close. I actually have it pulled up right here, and I was able to watch that on Friday, to kind of just because I hadn't seen it before, and I was surprised to see that he had played Jesus. But it's actually kind of a really interesting film. It's not a traditional Jesus film.
Right.
I think it falls more in the kind of the category of like the Last Temptation of Christ, which was made by Martin Scorsese.
Yeah. That had a lot of. That's actually Ron Pertee brings that up on Twitch. He says, "Last Temptation of Christ." He learned all about Christ from that movie, which, by the way, was surrounded in controversy. Directed by Martin Scorsese, starring Willem Dafoe. And I remember people were boycotting. I remember seeing it. I was like too young to really know what was going on, but I remember people like being angry about that movie for some reason. Why was that movie so controversial?
Yeah. So I think to fully appreciate how controversy, why the movie was controversial is also to try to like kind of follow the Jesus,
Follow the Jesus,
sort of the origins of the Jesus movie, I
Big
guess,
Lebowski.
right? Because well, the thing that's crazy is that they've been making films about Jesus since like when the camera was created.
Right.
That was one of the first things that they did. Specifically, it was first used to capture plays that were being performed on, they call them passion plays.
Right. Why do they call them passion plays? Because I know the Passion of the Christ is his devotion to humankind in those plays where they show him like getting beat up for 3 hours. Is that the
Yeah.
Is that the deal?
I mean, yeah, I'm not entirely sure the origins even of the phrase passion. I'm assuming there's some sort of theological reason for using that term. If I had to guess, I think it has something to do with just like the love of God or the love of Jesus.
Right.
Right.
For the love of, yeah, I always liked. Yes, Ron Pertee, dogma does count actually, because there's Buddy Christ in that, and I think doesn't Alanis Morissette play God? And that I find it funny that there is the whole idea of the Trinity. There's the God, the Holy Spirit, and Jesus, and they're all the same, but they're not. They're all different. They're all distinct, but they're one. Has there been a movie that has? I feel like the Passion of the Christ kind of dips into that a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I think one of those, like the Trinity is one of those things. It's like it makes no sense, but also at the same time, like the only thing I can think of, right? Not necessarily movie related, but just the way our brains work, is that so you are a person, you're a single person, but yet you actually have two brains inside your skull. You have the left brain and the right brain, and they're basically held together with neurons.
Oh,
and so
with glue and coffee.
Yeah. The coffee that gets it's the IV'd into your bloodstream that flows through your brain.
That's the only thing keeping me together.
Coffee infused blood. So technically you're two people, but
Right.
you're you and you're one person.
Yeah.
Even though you have two brains that are operating in unity with one another.
Like Steve Martin and The Man with Two Brains, except it's not like that at all. It's more like, you know what that makes me think of? See, I'm just making movie parallels. It makes me think of Being John Malkovich / Get Out. There's the person, there's the person who's trapped inside, and then the person on the forefront. But I think it's really important that we. I don't know if it's important, but it's cool that we bring up movies that feature this kind of imagery, because I feel like there's definitely so many ways to interpret Jesus and so many ways to get outraged by interpretations of Jesus. And I know that people were outraged by Willem Dafoe in The Last Temptation of Christ, and Martin Scorsese make what, like, still to this day can't figure out, like, it's just a movie. But some people, they take these passion plays, these Christ movies very seriously. But at the end of the day, they're an interpretation. They're a work of art. They're their representation of someone's idea of it. And does it ever go too far, do you think?
Personally, my take on it, no, I don't think it ever goes too far, right? Because
Right.
like I think that because I was reading a book about this too, where it talks about how complicated doing a film based on Jesus actually is.
Hmm.
Because like on one hand, you're not really given much with the content in the source material, and when you try to add to it or deviate from it, there's such a strong visceral reaction,
Right.
from people on both sides. Like you could either go one direction or the other, and you'll offend somebody, right?
One
And so what
Direction.
I think,
That offends me.
yeah. And so the idea is like, you know, um, because like when you're portraying Jesus in film, you're portraying a view of Jesus and a perspective of Jesus, and if it doesn't line up with your own perspective,
Right.
like it's gonna make you mad and make you angry. Or even if it doesn't line up with the perspective that's been sort of put forth by the church, of like the church saying like this is what Jesus looks like, this is how he acts, right? And so because like there's an element of Jesus in the sense that in any culture that worship Jesus, there's an image of Jesus that matches themselves. There's a tendency to sort of make Jesus into your own image. And
Right.
so then so when you have these films, to me, I think that like these Jesus films are actually kind of interesting and unique in the sense that they kind of give you glimpses of society and culture. And so
Right.
both, I think, like what's happening in the film and how Jesus is being portrayed is intriguing, and then their people's reaction to the film is also intriguing, because you can see the ways in which this film was sort of either with or against culture. Like a good example is what is it? It's a movie that was written or made in the 70s. The Gospel According to Saint Matthew. It was a French movie that I think eventually they dubbed into English. But like that was praised by the church and its portrayal of Jesus. When you basically have like, if you go and you watch it, it's kind of really strange. It's super two-dimensional. There's no feeling or emotion in any of the words that are being communicated. It's just like as if you were reading off a script. And so like that's one of the things I think ends up happening is when you make Jesus movies, there's a tendency to make it very two-dimensional because there's a fear to like
Right.
to
To
be.
like to question. I mean, I feel like that's very common in a lot of biopics. For instance, I bring up Bohemian Rhapsody because there was a lot of controversy going into that on how they were going to represent Freddie Mercury and whether or not they were going to portray him as the man he was or like this sort of iconic, flawless figure. So, yeah, I could see like them treading lightly on trying to create more of a depth to a character that, I mean, ultimately was a guy, right? Like that was the reason Jesus was like, I am going to live the experience of man, so therefore I will become a person and also be God, but also be the Son of God, but also be a man. And that was like the whole point of that. That's what the point is in the Bible, I think, right? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, no, yeah. The point was for him to live, like he was fully human, fully God, right?
Yeah, totally
Which
God,
kind of like
100%
doesn't,
deity.
yeah, it does,
Not like
which
Superman. It's a demigod.
sometimes is like logically it's hard to sort of navigate that idea, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the thing that's interesting is that he's fully God, he's fully human, and then you have movies that try to portray his humanity, and it's like, well, he's too human, and so
Right.
then people object.
He's more
Um,
human than human, like Rob Zombie. I'm just gonna keep firing away at those, so just get used to it,
yeah,
Jake.
there's a lot of cultural references you're making that I'm not picking up.
It's okay. Maybe like one day, 100 years from now, when this video has been viewed at least 100 times, there will be somebody who comes across it and appreciates the random the randomness of it. But yeah, like he was supposed to. I just want to like make the disclaimer too that we're looking at this from. I'm looking at this from a filmic point of view and from a text, like saying the Bible represents this guy in this way, and then movies have interpreted him in such a way. And I think people and churches and different parts of different churches and different sects of Christianity have claimed their own version of the story. But I find that interesting, especially in the United States, because there are so many people who will interpret the Bible for themselves to kind of bolster their own behavior instead of saying like, you know, like instead of the other way around, kind of like doing things the way they want to do it and then saying, well, after the fact, you know, it's okay because I went to church and they forgave me, and then also the Bible says this, and so I should be good. Am I right? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, what I describe what you're talking about is that people have a tendency to create a God or even create Jesus in their own image, in something that is comfortable, that makes them feel good, right? Like that there's an element to that. We're looking for that comfort. And I think that when you kind of take a look at the Bible and at Scripture, and you try to kind of look at some of the themes that are being played out here, like in a way, like the Bible is a fantastic mirror in the sense that it sort of shows a lot of the flaws with humanity.
Yeah.
And when you look at Jesus and what is written in the Scriptures, he sort of represents this picture of what humanity could be, or what humanity was meant to be if we weren't sort of fundamentally flawed.
Right.
And so I think that like there's an element of this story that's appealing. There's a lot of parts to the story that are really appealing. It appeals to our humanity in the sense that like here you have like an underdog, someone from a lowly position, who's able to live a life that has an impact. He's able to there's a supernatural element where he's able to go from sort of adversity,
from larval stage to pupa to super ubermensch,
and then you know have a love that conquers all, including death.
Right.
Like there's an imagination there that I think captures the heart, captures people's imagination.
Yeah.
And so I think one of the
it transcends, so to speak.
Yeah, it transcends, and so, you know, I think there should be freedom there in order to be able to to kind of pull this back and bring it back full circle, right? So Martin Scorsese and The Last Temptation of Christ, that was, I think, coming from his own personal place of things that he was exploring as, you know. I don't know if he was Christian or Catholic, but I know that he was given that the novel that it's based on, he was given it to it as a gift, and he had read it, and it had impacted him in a way where he was like, I want to make a movie about this.
Right.
You know, and so like I think that you can't just. And so that's the reason. That's part of so part of the reason why it was controversial was just that it was very different than the types of movies that were being made.
Right.
It was more of like a, yeah.
Well, I mean, Jen the Fierce says movies are rarely as good as the book, and I think I agree because but Scorsese in that sense wanted to adapt a book into a movie, and people were looking at that as sacrilege, I guess, because he wasn't looking at it with the reverence perhaps that he should have, and sort of looked at it as Jesus as a man dealing with a situation, maybe.
Yeah, there was a lot of things that where he kind of humanized Jesus, and a lot of, you know, I feel like both the author of the book and Scorsese a little bit too, right? Like this is sort of, I think, what resonated is that here now you have a picture of Jesus that's also struggling with the same things that we struggle with. You know, because it kind of emphasized that a little bit more. And it just so happened that those things that you struggle with are things like just having a family and having kids and like, living living a normal life.
Living your best
right?
Christ life. Yeah.
That's ultimately what like Christ was tempted with, is sort of this thing of like you can live as a man for the rest of your days, or you can sacrifice yourself. And so I think that's the bit that actually most people had issue with, was just sort of like having Jesus sort of step down from the cross and live a normal life. And if I think that's actually a pretty interesting idea to explore, right? And so but yeah.
I totally agree with the idea that like looking at things from multiple dimensions instead of just sort of taking them as the lore literally. I mean, we can look at this like comic book adaptations and whatnot, because we could say like which are the better comic book adaptations, the ones that are literally the comic book translated to film in every way, or the ones that actually look a little bit further and deeper into potential character traits, like the Nolan verse versus the Snyderverse, maybe. I don't know. But I do think, not to be like trite about it, but I think it's, like these are stories that are told over and over again, and they resonate and they last for a reason, for generations and generation, over and over again, because obviously there's something about them that is appealing. And let me just say hi to Lori3040. Hello, welcome to everybody on the Twitch. I'm just doing some technical stuff here in the background, but never mind that. Welcome to Aristotle Full Throttle. We're talking about Jesus movies with our guest today, Jake A. He is you're studying to be a military chaplain. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, part-time military chaplain.
What does that entail?
So military chaplain is actually, I think, so the chaplain role is a really cool role, in the sense that what does it entail is that you're willing to be there for the troops. So the primary role is that you're there to facilitate any religious requirements that the troops may have, right? Members of the military may have. Right. So whether it's just like, hey, I need someone to, to marry me, or I want a baptism performed or something like that. But you're also there as sort of a, as a counselor, as a sort of a crisis counselor,
right?
Which is actually the part that I'm interested in.
Yeah.
So, and I was in the Air National Guard for 13 years, and so my main motivation, well, what I was trying to do is come up with a way to like get the 7 years in that I needed to be able to get health benefits, but I didn't want to do it as a soldier anymore.
7 years.
And so that's so I was like, well, if I can do 10 years as a chaplain, that'll give me my retirement, and I'll actually get to
counsel.
I'll get to do kind of what I like to do, which is counsel, be there for people when they need help, come alongside people and support them.
That's really important. And thank you for your service, and thank you for that service, for the service. That's like double service.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Hey, Stroke here. Hey, Ms. Mickey and Calvin and Veronica on Instagram. Let me know if you guys can hear that. I've got like you guys routed in on Instagram to an earphone. So hopefully you guys can hear the conversation as well. If you can't, jump over to twitch.tv/Aristotle Full Throttle, and you can catch the split screen live stream there. But our guest today is Jake A. We're talking about Jesus in movies. Jesus H. Christ. Did I just take his name in vain? What's the H stand for? Herman?
I don't even know.
Hero? Like Hiro? Maybe he's Japanese. How come Jesus is always played by a European guy when he's supposed to be like speaking Aramaic from the Middle East? What happened there, Jake?
What happened there?
How do we get so confused with casting on this one?
because white, you just need to have the white Jesus. You need to have a Jesus that looks like you so that you can be more comfortable,
I guess.
with Jesus, right?
That's
So
like
it's just
I like Buddy Jesus. That's my
yeah.
Jesus.
I've actually never seen the movie Dogma, and I read up on it a little bit this morning, and I was like, this is a movie I want to watch.
It's pretty funny. It's pretty good. It's in the Jay and Silent Bob trilogy, the original trilogy, and then there's like another trilogy since then. Apparently, I don't know if they're doing 9 movies or whatever, but it's fun. It's got like a Matt Damon and Ben Affleck at their, I don't know if it was their peak, but it was definitely their launching point because they had just done Good Will Hunting and they were Oscar-winning screenwriters and superstars at that point. And then they just did movies. They just appeared in Kevin Smith movies all of the time as favors. So they were like A-listers showing up in a movie that cost about $15 to make, which was pretty cool. Kevin Smith has a lot of good friends in high places, and he grew up Catholic. I grew up Episcopal. I believe you grew up. What was your denomination? Condiland is asking about denominations, and
Yeah.
I definitely grew up in the culture of like a subculture, decatholicnated Episcopal Catholic situation. So I have culturally experienced very similar things to, European Western world morals and mores and whatnot. So I'm inculcated into that culture. What about you?
Yeah. So I grew up non-denominational, but kind of reflecting more on sort of where I was younger. I would say a lot of our beliefs and the way we kind of went about, practicing our Christianity, I think a lot of the perspectives were very fundamentalist.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think I'm fundamentalist anymore.
Did you take the fun out of fundamentalism? Fundamentalism.
Well, it's called fundamentalism, but there is no fun in fundamentalism if you're a fundamentalist. Fundamentalism is it's almost like the what's it? I can't think of the name. Footloose.
Against dancing. Come on, dancing's fun. Everybody dances. Is it because you got to move your hips, like Forrest Gump or Elvis?
But
Jesus.
Yeah, but so there's an element of like fundamentalism where you tend to you look at the world from a lens in which you're like afraid of the world. You're afraid of culture. You're afraid of everything outside, and so you need to like protect yourself by a limit, like by not engaging,
right,
or like by trying to shield those that are easily influenced. You shield them from the horrors of the world.
Well, that seems to me cultish. It seems to be like a Scientology strategy. Am I off base by saying that? I don't. It just from face value, just from saying shielding everybody from the outside world sounds like a tactic for.
I mean, I could see Christian cults potentially popping up here and there. I mean, I don't think the actual like more like the fundamentalist movement, I don't think is fits all of the tropes of being a cult, all the characteristics. But I think there's definitely ways in which you can lean in that direction and land there.
Yeah, I mean, I think of the movie Jesus Camp when I think of that.
Yes.
Did you see that movie?
Yeah, I did. I saw that and was like blown away. So I watched that movie when I was in college, and remember being just so blown away by how much I related to what was happening on the screen.
Right. So like what, for instance? Is there like the constant praying, or was it the the snake handling? I don't know. I don't know if that's.
I think it was just almost just like this, like the indoctrination, right? The element of indoctrination, where it was just like, no, like, this is the way you need to believe, and what's so what's interesting about that film is that actually kind of highlights sort of something that happened in history, in American history, anyways, in terms of how religion got into politics. You know, because a lot of the things that they're talking about in that film when they're at that Jesus camp, and the things that they're guilting and or the things that they're shaming these kids into believing, like a lot of this comes from this perspective of how to engage with culture, which is the best way we can engage with culture is to try to change it for God. Right. Which is actually something that was a new thing that came out in the 1970s. Yeah. Prior to this, that's not what was happening.
I'm really curious about this. Now, this sounds intriguing to me because the one thing I want to say about Jesus camp and stuff like that is it just feels to me unfair to have a kid in that position, because a child to me just wants to make the adult happy. So no matter what sports team you're rooting for, no matter what religion you're rooting for, the kid is going to wear those colors and wear that hat because they want to make their parents happy. They want to make the adults happy. They want to cheer. They want to feel included. So it's kind of unfair at that stage of the game, for me, my own opinion, to like introduce a kid to that level of dedication to anything that they're not choosing for themselves. Or maybe they are that enthusiastic. I don't know, but I just think kids need to sort of figure out who they are and then maybe gravitate toward something later on in life. But at that point, it does seem like a little bit manipulative for children. But that whole group of fundamentalists in America, and fundamentalism and the Bible Belt, and that whole section of this country has shifted in the last 50 years. From, I feel like, I mean, I do see the good intentions in a lot of people. I see the good intentions in the religion. I see what is written down and what resonates, like treat everyone the way you want to be treated. Jesus, like the whole golden rule situation, and help out those who are less fortunate, and help out people who need help, or injured, Good Samaritan, like stuff that, good lessons in life that maybe perhaps you're not naturally inclined to do, are included in stories from the Bible and represented in movies that are based on those stories. But I feel like since then, particularly in the United States and also in Australia too, and the UK, there's been a shift, no? From like the good intentions of what's written down to the actual actions of people and what people are willing to put up with, or at least vote for, to be to be honest.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that, so it feels like this shift, and it feels like, hey, we're heading in a direction that is new. Like, we haven't done this before. But also, like, this is not new. Like, this actually happened. And what is really interesting is when you look at what is happening in Scripture, specifically around the time of Christ, right? A lot of what the time in which these movies are trying to portray, I think you'll be surprised at how much a lot of the things that we're seeing in society today are actually the things that were happening in society then. There was rampant racism. You brought up the story of like the Good Samaritan, where the Jewish people were very racist towards Samaria and the Samaritans, to the point where they refused to walk through their city. Like they walked around them to get where they needed to go.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
And so when you have these teachings of Jesus, like, there is a lot there in what he's saying, especially because like one of the things that I've been kind of really trying to explore is just this idea of like, he's preaching that you should love your enemy. And that you, like, not only just loving your enemy and like holding your tongue or maybe not punching them out, right? Like, this is like loving your enemy in a way where you actually want your enemy to flourish and to prosper.
That seems counterintuitive, Jake. Why would I want that? Isn't the enemy of my enemy my friend, and the friend of my enemy my enemy? And isn't my and
And,
wait, here's a tongue twister that Oliver made up, a mutual friend of ours. Enemy anemones emanating enmity. I think I said it right. Enemy and enemies emanating enmity. I said it wrong, but you guys get the picture. Um, why would I want my enemy to flourish?
um, and the thing I'm realizing is that the reason why you'd want your enemy to flourish is because when you seek to do good for your enemy, you begin to understand where they are coming from.
That's an
You
important.
begin to understand what has brought them to this view, this perspective of the world that gives them the feeling that they are justified and in good standing to do these actions against you.
Ah, that's interesting. I feel like that's kind of the bedrock of this show is that, if anything, even if we disagree about whatever movie we're watching or whatever TV show, if I hate the show that you're watching, I feel like we can offer up our perspective and also see it and respect it. And that is probably the lowest level of that. I think the highest level in this land right now is kind of the climate of the country where it's completely divided. The president is actually playing into, I mean, from my point of view, the president is stoking the flames of hatred in the United States to try to keep people divided. I think there are also other countries involved in that, obviously. For instance, I think Putin buying up ads on Facebook and all of that stuff is deliberately shooting an arrow into our Achilles heel, which is rampant racism, and making it just really kind of like fanning that flame.
Yeah. And actually, so because like, in the 1920s, right, is sort of when you first had a lot of ideas come out in culture that really began to challenge the Christian perspective. So this is like, so Marxism, scientific discovery, related to like Darwinism and evolution, really becoming more mainstream. You're having more scriptures, the agnostic, like we're discovering more ancient literature for us to analyze, and so even our understanding of history is changing. And so in the 1920s, as all of this stuff is happening, and also first of all, like when you brush history with a really broad stroke, like you're gonna miss very details, and so I am gonna brush with a very broad stroke, just to try to give an idea of like what is happening and how do we get to this point right now, right, with what happened with Trump basically, and this is my perspective. But in the 1920s, the Christians decided that the best way to interact with all of these counter ideas, there was actually there was almost a schism. There's two ways to address this. So the first was there's like almost like a modernism approach of like, okay, our understanding of Scripture needs to change, and we need to go with the times. And then there was the counter to that, which is like the fundamentalism perspective of like, no, the Bible is, my interpretation of the Bible is exactly what is there. And so these ideas are against God. And so what they decided to do in the 1920s is to sort of hunker down, get in a bunker and protect themselves from the world, and just like hold off until God comes and fixes everything. So it was like an disengagement. And so in this disengagement, them creating these safe spaces for themselves, they created Christian universities, there was Christian movies, Christian books, Christian songs. They created a whole Christian subculture that was basically separate and absent of normal mainstream culture. They kind of looked exactly the same, except it was more Jesus, I guess, right?
Right.
And so this happened,
spread
and they were
top.
And they were just like happy with that. Their view of engaging with culture was to disengage. It's almost like an exodus. They just decided to leave. And so, but like the world kind of continued on and the country continued on. And so like they got to a point where they realized that like, hey, actually like culture's going on without us, and we need to do something about it. And what's interesting is that one of the things that triggered them to rethink their strategy was actually Roe versus Board of Education. When now you have a Christian,
right?
Yeah, now you have a Christian university being forced to desegregate.
And so that's part of what, I guess, I mean, I was looking into what you had suggested earlier, the culture wars, basically the differences, the deep-rooted differences in value systems that people want to hold on to and then fight each other about.
Yep.
and
that's kind of where this is coming from. And so, because like, if you people will normally say, and this is an accurate statement, right? People normally say that the religious right came from the sort of sexual revolution in the 60s and Roe v. Wade, right? And so, and there's an element of truth to that. But even before those things happening, you had this, Brown versus Board of Education, and in the Bible Belt, they wanted to fight against this, but they were finding that they didn't have enough of an influence just on their own. And so they needed something that they could also bring the Northeast in and get them to align with this new strategy. And so that's when you have now the religious right. That's when you're seeing, like, in the 1976, I think, was declared as the year of the evangelical.
Right.
Where now they're aligning themselves with the Republican Party, and being Christian and being Republican are now synonymous, which before that was not the case.
And why is that? Why is it that the values of Christian folks, did the values shift? Did the values of Republicans shift? Because I know that there was a shift, and like basically Reagan won because of the backing of the Bible Belt. Reagan was put into power specifically by appealing to that group of Americans.
Yeah, it's not necessarily, like, I think it's basically, it's the strategy that shifts. So now, instead of like, we're just gonna, because like, so the another term for it is they went from Exodus, so they decided just completely disengaging culture. So they were already thinking these things, right? But now they're like, well, we want to engage culture now to the point where we actually want to control the outcome. Like, we want our society, we want a moral society, right? And it's almost like an opposite of what this why this country even was created, or why it even exists today, when it was the Puritans who wanted the freedom to worship the way that they wanted to worship. There wanted to be a separation of church and state. And so now it's almost like there's a shift in strategy where it's like, hey, actually, this didn't work out for us because we think the society is being immoral. And so, like, let's re-engage with culture and kind of get it back to the moral country that it should be.
Yeah, and it's literally a fundamental divide in this country where people believe that there's a group of people who think that the United States ought to behave in a way in accordance with Western Judeo-Christian values, yet the whole fundamental idea of this particular nation is that we are not a religious state. We separate the idea of state and religion, and you are free to worship however you choose in this particular structure. And that, to me, seems to be almost like an impasse with people, because people are like, well, fundamentally, this country is Jesus-y, so we should all stay Jesus-like. And that sort of ignores the fundamental doctrine of how we set this whole system up. I think that's my opinion. It can be argued, and it has been argued, that it's like, in God we trust, but still.
Yeah, and I think it's also one of those things that it's important that that's the case, right? Because when we talk about faith, we talk about religion, We talk about spirituality. Like, these are things that you need to do this on your own.
Right.
No one can do this for you. No one can tell you what you to believe. I think even personally in my life, like, one of the best things I did was when I was in college, I went through a form of deconstruction where everything that I grew up to believe, I needed to go through and process those things and determine what are the things that I can say I actually do believe this as Jake,
Right.
and what are the things I need to throw away or explore.
That's an important process, I think, that everyone should go through. I think everyone should critically and empathically analyze what's going on with their belief system. And it's a hard thing. I think there's a lot of people who genuinely don't have any urge to reconcile their actions with their beliefs and vice versa or whatever. But I think it's an important thing. I think so many people just will throw their backing behind something, and then you sort of ask them why, and they're just like, I don't know. Seems like a good thing to put my flag, attach my flag to. Seems like a good color to wear on my. Like, it doesn't go beyond that surface level of allegiance, and I think it's important that when you back something with particularly your vote, which is your one piece of power. It is your duty as a citizen. It is the part of the country that you hold in your hands and in your heart, that, like, if you use that, and then again, this is me asserting my opinion on other people. You can use that however you like. You can use your vote however you like. However, just understand that it is the most powerful thing you can do as a citizen. Unlike a fundamental way, obviously you can give back to the country in other ways, and you can provide service in other ways. But it just baffles me as to why so many people are willing to just kind of throw that away, or say that they're voting against someone. Like, during the last 2016 election, obviously I didn't vote for Trump, but there were some people that I was trying to convince to not vote for Trump, but they were like, I am voting against Hillary. And I'm like, you're not voting against anyone. That's not how a vote works. A vote works for somebody. You're backing someone, so you're deciding to back this person. But I just want to give a shout out to these folks in the Twitch right now. If you're on YouTube, for some reason I can't see any comments. So if you're on YouTube right now, you can jump over to the twitch.tv/Aristotle Full Throttle and jump in on the conversation. Yes, there's some really cool discussion going on here. Highway to Heaven. I remember that show with Michael Landon. Michael Landon being one of America's dads, obviously from Little House on the Prairie. I just saw a really cool piece on Good Morning Sunday or on CBS with Melissa Gilbert talking about Little House on the Prairie and being Laura Ingalls on that show. But it's interestingly enough, Michael Landon was Jewish, but he's a very Christian-like figure in American society. But he's kind of like all-American Christian dad figure, homesteader from American type dude. Let's see. Liberty University is brought up here by Lori3040. I think that's what you were is that the university you were referring to earlier?
I think that's just like an example of a university that popped up as a result of, like, sort of the 1920s. Like, we're going to create our own subculture. I know that the actual university that had issues with, Brown versus Board of Education was Bob Jones University.
Right.
That was the one that really led that charge. And I think the other thing
does
too,
it get any more generic than the name Bob Jones, though? Come to John Smith University. I mean, John Smith obviously being a historical figure, but also one of the most common names. But go.
I mean, I was always told to, like, not trust a person with two first names. That was the thing. Although I don't know who actually told me that. It's just the thought I have in my head. Like, don't trust people with two first names.
Yeah, don't do that. I knew a kid named John Johnson when I was a kid. That's too many Johns in one name, if you ask me. Let's see. Do you notice a racial aspect to that? This is Candyland asking, I mean, lots of people understand many blacks and Hispanics to be religious and still vote more liberal, but it seems white liberals are assumed to be atheists.
Yeah, that was in response, I think, to Ron Purr about the saying that he's a liberal, but folks automatically think he's an atheist.
Right. Yeah. That's funny, and a lot of times people assume atheism means immoral or amoral, which is also, this is the great frustration of mine, because personally, I definitely lean more toward the atheist end of the spectrum. I feel like that, as much evidence as I've seen, things tend to push me in like the agnostic. Like, I can't say 100% yes, I can't say 100% no, just by virtue of nobody can say that. I think that like anybody who tells you that there is a 100% chance there's a God or there's a 100% chance there isn't, is only a Sith speaks in absolutes, is what I'm saying. And so to me, the whole concept of agnosticism seems most appealing. However, I feel like you can function perfectly moral and perfectly in a way that you say, the actions I do affect others in a certain way that I should understand that I would treat people the way I would want to be treated. And that seems to be a universal lesson. That's what Jesus had written on the back of his Reeboks.
Yeah. Although, I mean, like, one of the things that I think is, so you talk about like, so moralism, right? Like doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I think a part of it is actually, it's like, so what Jesus is saying is it's a little bit more than just doing the right thing. It's also like just having the right heart. Right. It's not enough just to be able to wish do good to somebody, but also to do good from somebody in a place that's actually where it's coming from a place of caring and empathy, and isn't just like trying to get into the bucket of being good. I think, because I think that's what tends to happen when we look at religion, is it turns into moralism. It turns into just trying to be good, trying to do all the good things and then avoid the bad things. Yeah,
it's like just racking up scores. I got this many good points versus this many bad points, therefore I'm good. And it's not.
I'm trying to balance the scales on my own,
Yeah.
And I think there's a part of the message of Jesus that's actually the most important part, is that you can't balance the scales on your own. There's nothing you can really do to rack up enough good points to do it. It's more about getting to the point where you're understanding that there is an element of my nature that is flawed.
Yeah.
And that, like, when you look at history and you look at the ways in which humanity has done horrible things against one another, right? Like that, there's an element of that in all of us. But that is through Jesus that we're able to look at that in a very honest lens, because we're not putting an identity and an emphasis on something that we're trying to obtain and get to. Right. So like the best way I can explain it is like, I'm not putting emphasis on being courageous. Or like, if I were to put emphasis on being courageous, like I'm a brave person, my brain's going to naturally avoid like the times in which I'm not being brave and I'm not being courageous. Like, it's going to try to protect that identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so
like, turn a blind eye maybe onto the bad behaviors. Is that
you're in a way you're not allowing yourself to see the ways in which you're doing the same thing that you're against.
Yeah, I feel like that is a problem right now. There's such a blind spot for so many people, and I encourage people to look for their blind spots or ask other people to help find their blind spots, because that's exactly what they are. They're a blind spot. You do not know what you are missing a lot of the time. So it's important to get feedback from other people if that's what you actively seek. Again, I think there's a lot of people who just are so happy and comfortable not knowing. Like, that's fine. They're okay. It's just with those folks, a lot of them tend to be the loudest ones in the room, and you're just like, all right, calm down. You're being very loud, and have not done any introspection, which is really a super important aspect of all of this.
Yeah. I call it a spiritual act, the spiritual act of self-reflection.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that a lot. I think about like Zen Buddhism. It seems pretty appealing because the whole idea is to kind of like look inward and look at all of your humanity and flaws and try to figure out how to exist in the moment and be present. I find it interesting. There's so many movies on Jesus because we love to watch Jesus get beaten up for us.
Yep.
We like to watch him get his skin ripped off in the Passion of the Christ. Good golly. I was watching that. I'm like, nobody could survive this much. After a while, it just got numb. 45 minutes of Jesus getting whipped by Roman soldiers. I was like, all right, yeah, cool. He's gonna die now. For me. Thank you, Jesus. But I find it interesting. There's so much, a lot of that. We love to see a guy get his skin ripped off. We love to see a guy nailed to a cross and bleeding to death, getting stabbed in the side. We love to watch that. We walk into a Catholic church and that's the image. If you were from another culture that didn't understand Catholicism and you walked into a church and you saw a big bloody Jesus bleeding on a pin, nailed to a cross, and they were like, okay, and in about 45 minutes we're going to eat his body and drink his blood, I would say, you guys are out of your goddamn minds. Jesus H. Christ.
Be like, that's kind of messed up. What is going on?
It's super creepy. No, it's
Yeah.
totally fine. But, you know, I think the Western world tends to be any representations on a massive degree of, like, say, Muhammad, the Prophet Muhammad, who, I mean, I'm saying that sort of rhetorically because I know that so many times he's ever represented in any type of art form, people are attacked physically for that. But it's I don't know. It's an interesting distinction. If you have any thoughts on that, I'd like to.
I mean, I think you're touching upon it, right? In the sense that, like, you know, there's an element of, specifically with you know, you can't represent Muhammad, like there's an element to the religion that says that you're not supposed to do that.
Right.
So like that definitely is problematic when you're trying to portray Muhammad. But as far as like the other ones, like, you know, like I guess maybe like Buddha, would that be another champion of another faith?
I mean, he's supposed to not be deified. However, he is worshipped as a god, Buddha, but he's just kind of was a prophet or a wise dude. But yeah, like he's definitely deified. And I just want to give a heads up to the people on Instagram. It's about a minute and a half. Shy asks, what about the atrocities that people have done in the name of Christianity? There are a lot, like Timothy McVeigh.
Yeah.
Did he not? Was it not he a fundamentalist Christian that was basically a domestic terrorist in the name of Jesus? But also Waco, David Koresh and whatnot. But yeah, these are very famous Christian domestic terrorists. Stroke here or Shy. If you want to jump over to the Twitch, you can go to twitch.tv/Aristotle Full Throttle. We're running it. We got about 45 seconds left here on Instagram. I'll see you guys on Instagram tomorrow. We're going to continue the conversation on YouTube, Twitch, and Periscope, and all of those things. Periscope. So guys, yes, our special guest today is Jake A. We're just getting into the thick of it. This discussion about, you know, Jesus and movies and entertainment and how we, as a society, revere, regard, disregard the iconography and the message. And I guess I feel like it gets lost. A lot of the ideas get lost in the weeds. But Instagram, guys, I will see you tomorrow. We're going to continue the conversation. Here's a good point that Ron Pertee brings up. The Crusades were a blast. What about Indiana Jones and the Judeo-Christian imagery in those movies? I related to them because I grew up sort of hearing tangentially about these things, like the Ark and the the Holy Grail. I mean, we even talked. Someone was mentioning earlier the Monty Python movies. We should talk about Monty Python and the Holy Grail and Monty Python: The Life of Brian. These are very pertinent to the conversation.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think so. So I think kind of what we're talking, like the Crusades would fall under this category, and then all the other like any atrocity that's done in the name of God, right? I think actually does apply to what we're talking about in terms of like these strategies to how to engage culture, right? And so far what we've seen is leaning towards one way or the other, right? There's either an exodus where you completely get out of culture, or an exile, which actually comes from when Israel was exiled in Babylon. God asked the Israel nation to do well to the city. Like that was his command to them, was to do things that would benefit the city, not to be not to disengage and pretend like you're not a part of society, but to actually be part of it and do good things in society. That was sort of his command. And so these are the two ways that we've approached how to engage. And in both ways, both exile and exodus, you're seeing Christians sort of taking on this mantle and believing that they need to do things in the name of God. So they're on mission, and they need to be warriors for Christ and to do these things. But one of the themes that you'll see in Scripture is actually there's this idea that it's not our mission. It's called the Missio Dei, and it talks about how this Bible is actually talking about a restoration of all of creation, restoring humanity to what it was meant to be, restoring all creation in the world and the planet to what it was meant to be. And that this is not our mission, it's God's mission. It's owned by him. And that what ends up happening is that God is inviting us to participate with him, but it was never meant to be done for him or in his name. Because frankly, God is powerful enough to do those things on his own. He doesn't need our help. And so a lot of this, I think, comes from this place of like, we feel like we are the ones that need to make things happen, and so then we try to make those things happen, and then we end up making it worse.
Right. Versus
trying to recognize, like, like trying to take a moment to see, like, what is that work? Have that spiritual act of self-reflection, right? Of seeing sort of what is really happening here, and then reacting instead of trying to fix things on your own.
Interesting. I think it's funny in a not funny way that people take it upon themselves to interpret the Bible in a specific way, then dedicate their life to that. Particularly strange when it's violent, when there's like a violent overthrow, or like the exclusion of a group of people. When, if anybody wants to say that they follow the teachings of a dude who was like literally love everyone, like that was his. I love there's like this comic of the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus is like, love everyone as I've loved you. And one person's like, what about the blacks? And then another person's like, in the crowd, what about trans people? What about gay folks? And then Jesus says, did I stutter? I think that pretty much encapsulates his teaching.
And I actually think that's the thing that makes Christianity such a unique religion, is that if you really dig down and you see what it's about, it's the only religion that includes everybody.
Right. It is. I mean, there's interpretations of the Bible. I was lucky enough to work on a streaming series called Hella Gay, which was featured the internet creator by the name of Miles now. And he, the first season was a she. The second season became Miles. And Miles talked about on this show, he met with all of these different people, these groups of people who had to come out as hoping that society would recognize their identity as gay or trans or lesbian or whatever it was that was traditionally marginalized and scorned and frowned upon, which is just who these two see a preacher who is at a church like 3 blocks that way, and he is gay and he's married, and he was talking about interpretations of the Bible, and he said that even in the Bible there is reference to trans folk, saying like, oh, you know, I don't know the specific part of the Bible, but he was mentioning that someone came upon him, you know, it's all Bible talk, and that person was formless, not a man or a woman, you know, and he was like, well, this obviously is an interpretation. He interpreted that on his Sunday sermons, saying like, look, this is a trans person being referenced in the Bible. So I feel like the Bible
I'm gonna guess and say that it was the Ethiopian eunuch that's actually seen in the Book of Acts.
So what would that have been as far as that?
So a eunuch was, someone that just was neither man or woman.
Okay.
Probably someone who at a young age had their parts removed.
Right. Like the Unsullied in
yes.
Game of Thrones.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, and he's mentioning this, and I guess the reason I bring that up is because he is interpreting the Bible in an inclusive way. And there are so many people who interpret the Bible in an exclusive way. Jesus, if you want to fundamentally refer to Jesus as like Christianity as Christ, the whole idea that he brought along was like, hey, look, there's only one rule. There's no 10 commandments. There's just one rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. Love everyone as I have loved you. That seems to be very easy to digest. And to me, that encapsulates that particular religion or that particular group of religions. But so many people use those religions to say, no, you're not cool because it says it here. But to me, I'm like, wait, why don't you personally think that group of people is cool? Why do you personally hate that group of people and then justify it in this writing? Like, and then say that it's okay because it's okay to use violence. It's okay to use hateful terminology. It's okay to marginalize because it says it's cool in this book. It seems like those people have to be okay with violence and marginalization and hatred to begin with.
Yeah, I think there's an element of like there's a God in their head that is what their God does, right? Like their God is transactional. Their God blesses those that do good and curses those who don't. Like, you know, and like I was one of those people, right? Like when I read scripture, that's what I read into it. It was like I had this God in my head. I have a God in my head right now that's probably not a true picture of who God is, right? And part of my spiritual practice is actually growing in maturity in terms of how I view God, right? I think the significance of the resurrection, the death is putting to death a God of your own making and having a truer God be born out of that. That's sort of what happened in. So let's talk about
Star Wars. Sorry. Okay.
Star Wars. No, Jesus Christ Superstar. Because
Right.
like that's one of the themes that I think is awesome in that portrayal of Jesus is you have this view of Judas who's getting frustrated with Jesus because Jesus isn't doing what Judas wants him to do, and that's actually pretty biblical. There was a lot of one of the reasons why the Jews didn't really recognize Jesus as a Messiah is because when they thought of a Messiah, they thought of a warrior, a general that would come and overthrow the Romans.
Right.
There was an element of nationalism that was actually happening during that.
Not unlike right now.
Exactly, right? And so you're seeing these things play out over and over again. Like a lot of the themes in the Bible, you know, like part of it is, I guess you can for me, I look at the Bible as a historical text. I think it actually portrays events that really happened. But even if you don't want to take it as a historical text, you can at least be able to recognize that these stories in the Bible happen every day. Yeah. This is a story about humanity, the way in which our humanity plays out over and over and over again. Yeah. And actually, every single person in the Bible is flawed. The only person who's not flawed in the Bible is Jesus.
Interesting.
Everyone else is flawed.
Now, Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So yeah,
That's
so
that's
yeah,
important.
so Jesus
Go ahead.
Christ Superstar like presents this, and I think that's a cool thing to do. I think that's a great idea to explore. They don't specifically say what Judas's motivations. There's nothing in Scripture that indicates what Judas's motivations were for betraying Jesus.
Right.
But I think we can use our imagination to explore what that could have been and what that might have been. And I think Jesus Christ Superstar actually touches upon something that probably was close to maybe what really happened.
Yeah, there's got to be a reason that these stories appeal to generation after generation, and it's probably because we sort of, as people, can get summed up in many different stories that are shown in the Bible. Like I guess there's been so much repetition in society that they wrote it down. They created archetypes, or they noticed archetypes in human behaviors and human groups, and it's sort of a handbook. It's been a handbook for centuries, but do you think that's changing at all? Do you think that we're looking to other monolithic types of figures? I mean, Western society in general kind of has been doing that. I mean, all societies, I guess, all human societies have to aloft a figure every so often to a point of near. They just elevate. I mean, there's the Catholic Church has the Pope, and the Pope is super duper powerful. I mean, I don't know. The Pope is infallible by definition, apparently, but there are two living popes right now, so I don't know which one. If you were to put them in a cage match, who would come out if they're both infallible? I guess the whole point of that is, what can we learn from I guess flying too close to the sun? I don't know. Like the Pope himself being
What can we learn?
in that position of power. Like, what is it? I don't know. I just don't like the idea that the Pope is like, listen, guys, I've got a tomato soup can with a string on it connected to God himself. Like, that is literally the Pope's gig, is that he can hear what God is intending for all of the people. What do you think of that construct?
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't. So I think the Pope can be a great guy, right? Like I think,
Yeah.
because I mean, just the recent Pope right now, I think there's some things that are being said there that are actually pretty cool, right? There's also some things that are being said that aren't cool. But the thing I think is interesting is that, so like, I think I don't discard Catholicism as I think there's an element of spirituality. You can pursue Catholicism and you can pursue Jesus, and I think there's truth to that, right? You can arrive to these sort of fundamental truths related to love and everything, right?
Right. Different routes.
But there's some elements of the Catholic tradition that I don't think are entirely biblical. And I think the Pope would be one of those. Although, I mean, you do have I think Peter was the original Pope, I guess. But
PD the Pope.
But the thing is that so there is a book in the New Testament, Hebrews, where it talks about Jesus as your high priest. It talks about basically no longer requiring a religious establishment to be able to have access to the God. Talks about this, now you have this direct access, this interpersonal connection. You can pray, and you are as close to God as your other human being. There's no person that's closer, right? And so just this idea of you have Pope, the role of Pope as being closer to God than any others is actually not, I would say it's not biblical.
Yeah, it seems, I mean, if you were to interpret Christianity, it seems like the Catholic Church goes against a lot of it. Like all the rosary beads and all the animism and all the paganism stuff that they perpetuate, when there's supposed to be no idol worship at the same time. But humans are flawed. Humans are dichotomous. Humans are weird. So we'll do weird stuff like we don't worship idols, yet I got to pray like on these rosary beads, and I have to bury a St. Paul little figure upside down in my yard when I move into a new house to make sure whatever it is. Like there's so many different things that people do that and claim to be Catholic at the same time. But that's why it's funny, because people are funny. Ron says, what scares me is that my pain is God's love. What do you think about suffering to be loved?
Yeah. So, so first off, I just want to mention that idolatry or idols doesn't have to be physical. You can worship money. You can worship power. You can worship. There's basically like idols is when you take a good thing and make it the ultimate thing. So you can idolize anything, and
Right.
any form of idolization I don't think is healthy. When you're putting
David
something
Bowie.
yes, you idolize David Bowie. But yeah, no, like, cause like, and I've done this even personally with my own personal ambition, thinking that like, well, if I just got this thing off the ground, if I just did this thing, then I would be a worthwhile person. I put too much value and emphasis in some of the things that I've created, and ultimately it's actually been those things that I've created as a result are, it corrupts it. But yeah, so talking about the idea of like pain is God's love, right? Like where does suffering and love, how do they coexist? And it's one of those things where like oftentimes when you're forced to face a reality of your own darkness that you're purposely ignoring, it's going to be painful, right? Like it's just this idea of that it's the hard stuff that actually gives you, that refines that character. It really it's what helps you truly understand what is this, because like loving people is really hard. It's hard to love others. It's hard to look at others and want the best intentions, you know, to love others in the way in which you love yourself, especially when you're asked to love others with that lens, but you don't actually love yourself. Like, yeah. The only way I can really kind of explain this is like an analogy. So, you're dealing with a piece of clay. Is one of the things that you need to do actually is you need to go through and you need to remove all the imperfections out of that clay. Any like rocks or stones or whatever that's in the clay, you need to get it out. Because otherwise, if you're working the clay, especially on the wheel, that rock that's in there is going to harm the potter. It's going to actually cause them pain. And so one of the things that you'll do when you're working with a piece of clay is to start to work out those things. And so if you're imagining that you are that clay and you're now getting these things that are a part of you kind of ripped out because they're actually not good for you, it's going to result in pain and suffering. It's going to be painful,
but ultimately beneficial to the whole.
But exactly, ultimately beneficial to everyone, not only just to you, but to others. You know, you talk about, so one of the phrases I kind of rehearse in my head sometimes is just like, hurt people.
Yeah.
Like someone's action is always coming from a place, like there's a reason why they're doing what they're doing. That's actually one of the things that I love about being a parent, is early on with my child, I discovered that when my child does something, there's a reason behind it. When they're screaming and yelling at me, there's a good reason why they're screaming and yelling at me. And so part of a parent is to like figure out where that's coming from.
Yeah.
And so I think when you're able to see the way, you know, you're able to sort of, I think ultimately suffering is what breeds empathy. And so when you're able to recognize the ways in which you're hurting, you can recognize the ways in which other people are hurting.
Amen to
you won't
that.
have that perspective if you didn't go through that pain yourself.
Yeah, that's so true. And I feel like we see that over and over again in film in general, even in the most popular films, particularly in Western culture, like Star Wars, like Batman sacrificing himself, his whole image. I mean, I know it's we're going from Bible to Batman, but this is why you tune into Aristotle Full Throttle. But the idea of the Dark Knight sacrificing himself and his whole image of himself in the end of the Dark Knight, saying, "Look, I am the martyr for Gotham," and in a way. I mean, well, I guess Two-Face becomes the martyr for Gotham, and Batman becomes the villain. Um, and we love to see Captain America standing there with his broken shield, completely wounded and destroyed and utterly broken, facing down an army and willing to sacrifice himself, willing to walk toward that and go through the pain and go through the sacrifice for the sake of good and for the sake of fellow humanity. And that is it's a story that is probably the most compelling, and that's, I think, why the Jesus story lasts so damn long. That's a 2,000-year-old property right there.
And
Disney
I would actually
doesn't own
say,
it yet.
I think, yeah, exactly. I don't know, maybe. It actually makes me wonder if did Disney make any Jesus films? Was there? I think maybe, I know there was a cartoon. There was like a claymation called The Miracle Worker. I don't know if that was a Disney thing. I don't know.
I bet you they've done it symbolically. I mean, if anybody knows, let us know in the chat. Zack Snyder, Ron Pertwee brings up, making Superman into a Christ-like character, literally having him float in space in a crucifix form and recharge and all that. That whole Christ-like. I mean, he didn't really make that subtle. He's literally floating in space with his arms out, absorbing the power of the sun, which is basically our God. It is the fuel source, literally the God for many ancient Egyptians. But yeah, like, that is true. A lot of the stories that we watch, the figures that we revere, are the ones who are so willing to sacrifice themselves for everyone else. And it's kind of ironic that those are the figures that we revere most. And some folks are way too selfish to ever do anything, act like that. But I guess it's like, some people are like, well, he did it for us, so I don't gotta do it. Jesus killed him, sacrificed himself for me, so I'm good. And as long as, like, moments before my death, I take Jesus as my Lord and Savior, I should be exonerated and enter heaven.
As long as I got my fire insurance, then we're good.
Exactly. That's pretty good, fire insurance.
But I actually think that, like, I don't even think that's necessarily what, because, like, Jesus, a lot of what Jesus teaches is actually not that, like, hey, do good, and then when you die, like, you'll see the kingdom of heaven. He was saying the kingdom of heaven is now. It's here. It has arrived, right? And so this idea is, like, we don't have to wait till heaven. We can just make earth a heaven. Like, we can interact with, and that's actually, so, like, you know, I talked about the two ways. I think there's a third way, right? That's not necessarily we're not talking about disengaging from culture. We're also not talking about engaging in culture in a way where now we're forcing everyone to do what we think is right. There's, like, a third method, and that we try to embody Jesus and interact with everyone and culture through a lens of empathy, understanding, trying to see people for, you know, their true selves, like trying to see that diamond in the rough, not looking at what someone's doing and being like, you're a horrible person. Right, being willing to, like, see, well, where are you coming from? Why do you think the way that you think? What led you here?
Right.
What got you here?
And
That's so, and, like,
important,
let's journey together. Like, not even just like, here, you need to do some homework. Here's a bunch of things for you to read. But, like, no, let's explore that question together. You think, you know, it should be this way. Well, let's see what happens. I think the one of the things that you see in terms of the way Jesus interacted with society is that he came alongside his disciples. He came alongside other people, right? And he was willing to journey with them. He was willing to cry with them. He was, you know, happy with those that were happy, sad with those that were sad.
Really, really important lessons to absorb and understand. And I'm really grateful to have you talk about these things, because you have a working knowledge of what you're talking about. And if anybody wants to read up on this themselves, Jake has graciously offered to send some information. So I'm going to put some links in the Discord. I'll also send an invite to the Discord if you aren't already part of the Discord. Here, let me do that right now. And if you guys are interested in following up and researching this some more, and just to see the source material and all that stuff, and Jake is willing to provide that, and I'll drop that link in the Discord.
Yeah, and then the other one thing that I really want to talk about is that I think that the best Jesus movie that has ever been made is not a movie. It's a television series.
Was it Davy and Goliath, the claymation stop motion? Hey, Davy.
Close. No. No, it was actually made in 2018. It was crowdfunded. It's called The Chosen.
Okay.
And that if you want to explore, the story of Jesus, I think The Chosen is the best way to do it right now. Or you could also read the Bible too. That's another way to do it.
Right.
But what they try to do with The Chosen is they try to take that whole like two-dimensional thing of just people reading off like empty scripts. They try to abandon that model, and they really try to humanize everyone involved. They gave like Peter a backstory. They gave you get to know a little bit more about Matthew. And so that's one of the things I think is definitely worth checking out, especially if you are a fan of Jesus films. Check out The Chosen.
Yeah, I do like Jesus films in general. Planet is an old movie starring Joe Morton, by the way. Miles Bennett Dyson when he was very young, which is basically, it's very similar to The Man Who Fell to Earth starring David Bowie, but there are these movies that kind of take it to another level, or just a different version. And in the chat here, Condyland brings up that actually movie plots have very similar themes to those in the Bible, like sacrifice and all is lost moment. Christ dies, and then occurs the moment of hope, the resurrection. Yeah, it is a compelling arc that we gravitate toward as humans. It's very it's interesting. It seems to work. It's a good formula. They kind of
I think Timothy Keller has a quote where he talks about all good stories are Jesus stories, like Shawshank Redemption, Beauty and the Beast. Like he has a list. Timothy Keller is a pastor in New York, actually.
Timothy Keller, and does he write? Like, does he have writings that?
He has lots of writings, lots of books. He has lots of things, and some of the ideas that I talk about today are from Timothy Keller, talking about ways to engage with culture. So yeah, let us know where to find all that information, and I'll drop that in the Discord. I want to thank you for joining me. This is fun. I want to have you back at some point. I want to start having guests regularly and have really cool, lively discussions with the fans on Twitch, particularly, where I'm kind of leaning more into the Twitch direction because I'm digging the format there. It seems to be very stream friendly. And everyone on YouTube right now, if you're watching, for some reason my chat, my third-party chat program is not connecting to the YouTube chat. So if you have any questions, comments, and whatnot, you can jump over to the Discord and leave them there. I will leave Jake's info in there as well. Is there any other movie that you would like to mention before we go? I know we did talk briefly about Monty Python. I love Life of Brian. I love that idea of a Messiah just being kind of like the thing of the day back then. Everybody had their own Messiah situation going on. And yeah, it just was all the rage. So one of the things that I discovered is that, part of the reason why they lost the funding that they lost was that one of the investors was actually related to somebody who just worked on Jesus of Nazareth. I think, which came out in I
remember that movie.
Yeah, and so he read the script and then thought it would look bad to be associated. And I think it was like a family member was related to that project, and so he didn't want to have it be like there's this loose connection.
Right. Yeah, and you're referring to the fact that the Monty Python movie Life of Brian was defunded, particularly because the people realized that they read the script after the fact. The investors going, "Oh, you guys are lampooning the idea of a messiah," which is, and UK, the Queen being the head of the church, the Protestant church in England, it's not a good look, I guess, if you're a citizen there or you're an investor. But George Harrison graciously stepped in and gave them a couple $1 million to finish that movie, which is kind of amazing. George Harrison, famously, he used to work at McDonald's, but then he was in a band called the Beatles for a while. Famously, yeah, I find those movies hilarious. I think it's cool when people are a good sport about their religion, like in the Book of Mormon. I don't know if you've seen that musical, but it's written by two Mormons, Trey Parker and Matt Stone, wrote this musical called Book of Mormon, and it really rips apart Mormonism, but also like holds it aloft. It says, hey, look, this is what we believe in unabashedly, but also it's not so bad, is it? So,
and is Trey Parker, is that the same Trey Parker from South Park?
It is indeed the same folks, the same two guys who created South Park created Book of Mormon, because they grew up in the Mormon church and are insiders. So everything they say in that first song of Mormonism sounds ludicrous. Like the dude, I forget his name, John Smith, I guess, or whomever, went up the hill in upstate New York and came down with extra commandments and in like the 1800s. And there's the history of Mormonism sounds ridiculous, but in actuality, it's no more ridiculous than the origin of any other religion. And that's kind of the point. Ron, Perty, Trey, and Matt grew up in the Mormon church. I believe they grew up in Utah or Colorado, I guess. South Park. So indeed, yes. So yeah, unless we've got any more questions or comments, I think we've had a lively, spirited discussion, and it was very cool to have you on and hear you encourage folks, as I like to do all the time, to look inward, also examine your beliefs, examine yourself, examine your soda can before you drink it, because there might be a bee inside it. It could sting you on the lip. That is really fundamentally what we've decided today.
That is our PSA for today.
That is the PSA for today. Yeah, guys, you get stream of consciousness when you tune in. It's not always great. Thank you for joining us. And I'm just wrapping up these comments here. I played devil. Ron Perty played the devil in a play about Job in high school. Felt fitting. Ron, indeed, that's cool. I know that he recently suffered a bee sting too. So Jen the Fierce says, check your Kool-Aid. I'm reading these out of context, so I'll catch up on these later. Thank you guys for joining us. Thank you, Jake A, for joining us. And yeah, everybody go follow Jen the Fierce on YouTube. And rock out. See you guys later. I'm Aristotle, Full Throttle.